This is a Friday Shoes production. This is lesson 5-4 in our textbooks on page 268, and the target is I can compute mentally with percents. That's right. Who needs a calculator when you have a brain? When you compute with common percents like 75% or 25% or throw in 50% for all I care, it may be easier to use the fraction form of the percent. This number line shows some fraction percent equivalence, meaning someone says to you 25%, you can also think 1/4, or hey, I'm looking for 50%. Well, that's half. Hey, 75%, well, that's 3/4, and so on and so forth there. Those are popular ones. Furthermore, since some percents are used more frequently than others, it is helpful to be familiar with or memorize many of the percent fraction equivalencies shown below here. And I would say that obviously those are pretty popular there. The 25s, the 20s are popular, the 10s are popular, and I see this a lot too. 1/3 of, or 2/3 of. The 8s and the 6s, sure you'll see those, but I don't think they're as popular. Excuse me. Well, let's try a couple. It says compute 20% of 45 mentally. Well, I know 100% of 45 is 45, so the number I'm looking for is going to be less because we're only looking for 20% of. Now, the first thing I got to do is figure out what 20% is as a fraction, because I can do that in my head. 20% is actually 1/5. I memorized that. So I know it's going to be 1/5 of 45. 1/5 of 45 is the same as saying 20% of 45. And I know that of in math means multiply when we're talking about percentages of numbers. So that means to multiply. So let's take 1/5 of 45, and that's 9. And really what I'm ended up doing in my head is I'm actually taking 45 and dividing by 5. And I can do that because the top of this fraction is a 1. So the answer to that question is 9. How about the second one here? Compute 33 1/3% of 98 mentally. Well, I have to remember that 33 1/3% is actually 1/3. So let's replace 33 1/3% with 1/3. And we have 1/3 times 93, which means 1/3 of 93. And again, I'm really just taking 93 and dividing it by 3 in my head. And I can do that. I hope you can too. That's actually 31. How about you give it a shot on these 3? Come on back, see how you do. All right, so we have 25% of 32 for A. Well, 25% is 1/4. And 1/4 of 32 means 1/4 times 32. And I can simply just take 32 and divide by 4, and that's going to be 8. So the answer is 8. How about B? 12 1/2. Well, 12 1/2, I believe that's 1/8. Let me go check my chart. There it is. 12.5% is actually 1/8. Comes out to be 0.125. That's 1/8 times 160. I can see something else. I see 16 and I see this 8. I know I'm going to take 160 really and just divide it by 8. And that's because this is a 1 right here. And when I do that, I know 8 goes into the 16 right here 2 times. And you got the 0 left over, so I'm going to put it right here. That comes out to be 20. Those are all teacher tricks there. Quick math that I've learned over time. All right. How about this last one? 80% of 45. 80%, if I recall correctly, is 4/5. So that's 4/5 times 45 of 45 times 45. So 4/5 times 45, well, here's how this works. When it's not a 1 on top, here's what you do. First off, reduce this 5 with this 45, meaning this. 5 goes into 45, so you cross it out, make this the 9, how many times it goes into 45. Let me say that again. 5 goes into 45, 9 times. Now you have this 9 up here. These two numbers are gone. Now just take 9 times 4. That's 36. There's your answer. There's the fast way to do that. Again, let me show you real fast how that worked. So I've got 4/5 of 45. I know 5 goes into 45 9 times. 9 times 4 is 36. That's how you do it when there's a number other than 1 on top. All right, you can also use decimals to find percents mentally. Remember that 10% is 0.1, or 0.1, and 1% is 0.01. And really what that means is we're going to be moving the decimal one location here, one spot, and then in this case, we're going to be moving the decimal 2 spots. So when we compute mentally here, 3 and 4, you'll see that we're just moving the decimal in the number that we're trying to find the percentage of. So for instance, 10% of 98, well, 10% is 0.1, and this is one decimal spot we're going to move. So that's what it says here. When you're multiplying by 0.1, move the decimal 0.1 place to the left. So remember, we're going to the left on this. When we do that, check it out. We're literally just taking 98, moving the decimal over one spot. It's 9.8. So memorize that. Anytime you multiply by 10%, you just move the decimal point over one spot to the left. How about 1%? Let's check out number 4. 1% of 235. Well, 1% is 0.01, and that's 2 decimal spots we're going to move. This works because of the 1 there. And we're doing multiples of 10. So multiplying by decimals, here we are, again, to multiply by 0.01, move the decimal point 2 places to the left. Again, going to the left. So we're just taking 235, and we're moving the decimal over 2 spots to the left. That's 2.35. So again, anytime you multiply by 1% or try to find 1%, all you do is move the decimal over 2 spots to the left. 10%, you move it over 1 spot to the left. All right, you give it a shot here. Come on back, see how you do. 10% of 65. I just told you. This is 1 decimal spot because it's 0.1. This is the math behind it. But really all you're doing is moving the decimal over 1 spot. It's 6.5. That's how fast you can do those. 1%, here's E. 1% is 2 spots to the left. So we're going to multiply 0.01 times 450. If the math teacher asks you to show the work, there it is. But really all you're going to do is just move the decimal over 2 spots. I don't need a calculator for that. That's easy. Now again, that's if you memorize the 10% and the 1%, then you're just moving it 1 spot or 2 spots. How about this last one, 3%? Well, 3% is 0.03, and we're multiplying that by 22. Now I notice I can actually multiply 3 times 22 in my head. That's 66. And then I know there's 2 spots I have to move it. So I have to move the decimal to here. So the answer is 0.66. So sometimes it just behooves you to actually multiply the numbers out. And you're just going to have to find your decimal by looking at how many places you need to move to the left. Another way to do this, though, is notice that 3% is 1% 3 times. So if you take 1% of 22 3 times, you actually only have to do it once in your head, and that's going to equal 0.22. We're really just going to add up all these 0.22s, and guess what? That's 0.66. Another fast way to do it in your head. Excuse me. All right, real world example. Last one. And a little history over here. The Baseball Hall of Fame is located in Cooperstown, New York. It was dedicated in 1939, 100 years after Abner Doubleday, and there's his picture, started the game of baseball back in 1839. All right, the Weston Middle School Cougars won 80% of their baseball games this year. There were 35 games total. How many games did the Cougars win? Well, we got 2 examples here, 2 methods you can use. First one we'll do is using the fractions. So we take 80% of 35, that's 4/5 of 35. And you look over to the right here, it says, think about it. 1/5 of 35 is 7. So 4/5 of 35 is 4 times 7, which is 28. And the other way, if you remember what I did, was 5 goes into 35, 7 times 4 is 28. That's why it's 25 baseball games. The other way we can do this is use a decimal. So we can change 80%, and this is something we'll talk about again in the next lesson. 80%, change that into a decimal, and then just multiply by 0.8. Now, it says think 0.1 of 35 is 3.5. And we need 8 of those 0.1s. So we need 8 of these. So you do 8 times, that's what it says right there, 8 times 3.5, which is 28. I think this one actually is a little bit easier if you're doing it in your head mentally. All right, how about you give it a shot? Going back to see how you did. Alan and his brother ate lunch at the local cafe. They left a tip that was 20% of the bill. If the bill was $15.50, how much did Alan and his brother leave for the tip? This is going to happen in your life frequently, where you're going to put a tip on top of your bill that you get. In this case, they're talking about 20%. So this is going to be real easy, because here's what you do. Remember, 10% is just moving the decimal over one spot. So let's find out what 10% of 1550 is. When you do that, all you're doing is moving the decimal over one spot. So I'm going to move it over one spot, and you ended up with 1.55. I drop off the 0 because we don't have a thousandth spot when we're talking dollars, only out to the hundredth spot. So 10% is $1.55. Well, I need two 10%s, so I need two $1.55s. So I'm just going to add that up. That's going to be easy. It's going to be $3.10. That's 20% right there. That's how much tip they left for the server. Don't forget, you can always review this video. You can, of course, look at the examples in the book, which I just did. Or you can go on to the online textbook and check out the personal tutor videos. And as usual, this has been a Friday Shoes production.